Evening, everyone. My name is Michael Doylan. I'm the director of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Libraries, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to this evening's presentation, which has been organized and hosted by the American Geographical Society Library. I'm also really delighted that we're able to resume this lecture series after a brief hiatus last year due to the pandemic, and not only resume it, but also to extend our reach through using Zoom and to be able to reach a truly international audience this year. So welcome to everybody. The Holzheimer Maps and America lecture series was established in 1990 and has featured many of the leading scholars in the field of map history, and it continues to provide a very rich and diverse survey of the field. The series was inaugurated by the noted cartographic historian, Professor Brian Harley, and it's supported from the beginning by Arthur and Janet Holzheimer. And it's wonderful to know that they're among us in the audience this evening. Tonight is the 31st presentation in the Maps in America series. And now I'd like to introduce Massimo Vignelli, who's the curator of the American Geographical Society Library.
Thanks, Michael. I had muted myself and I don't usually do that. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Massimo Vignelli. I am the Assistant Director for Distinctive Collections and Curator of the American Geographical Society Library here at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Like Michael, I'm happy that we are able to host again this year the Maps in America lecture virtually. While I'm definitely missing the festivities of being in person, I'm excited that in this virtual format, we're able to reach so many people literally around the world. I also want to say a word of thanks to Art and Janet Holzheimer for their generosity in supporting this lecture series and for providing the opportunity to gather each year to hear some of the leading scholars and in map history talk about their research. Other thanks go to Ann Hanlon, Head of Digital Collections and Initiatives here at UWM Libraries, for helping me get everything set up for tonight, including multiple tests in Zoom to make sure that everything works the way we needed it to. And thanks to AGSL's Public Services Librarian, Georgia Brown, for creating a virtual exhibit to accompany the lecture, and she'll be dropping a link in the chat for you to peruse the exhibit at your leisure. We typically would have an in-person exhibit, as many of you know. This will suffice in the virtual world. I'd also like to take a moment for some land acknowledgements. Here in Milwaukee, we acknowledge that we are on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of Michigamme, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. And since we're here for a talk about the Grand Canyon, I also want to acknowledge that the Grand Canyon is the homeland to a number of tribes, including the Havasupai tribe, the Hopi tribe, the Walapi tribe, the Kaibab Band of Paiute Indians, the Navajo Nation, the San Juan Southern Paiute tribe, the Yavapai Apache Nation in Arizona, the Las Vegas Band of Paiute Indians, and there go the lights, the Mayopa Band of Paiute Indians in Nevada. I will be in the dark for a couple of minutes. My apologies. The Paiute Indian tribe of Utah and the Pueblo of Zuni in New Mexico. If you have questions during the lecture, please use the Q&A function in Zoom. And at the end of the lecture, I will moderate the questions and Tom will answer them. And now let me introduce tonight's speaker. Tom Patterson was the senior cartographer at the U.S. National Park Service Harpers Ferry Center, retiring there in 2018. He has an MA in geography from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Presenting terrain on maps is Tom's passion. He maintains the shadedrelief.com website and is the co-developer of the Natural Earth Cartographic dataset and the Equal Earth Projection for World Maps, both of which I can say we use on a fairly regular basis here in the AGSL. Tom is a former president of the North American Cartographic Information Society and more recently served as executive director to that organization. He is currently vice chair of the International Cartographic Association Commission on Mountain Cartography. His most recent map, released last month, depicts the physical features of North America. Please help me welcome Tom Patterson for our lecture tonight. Tom, I will turn it over to you. You can share your screen and get started.
Very good. Marcy, can you see my screen, I hope?
I can.
Okay, very good. Marcy, thank you very much for the nice introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to be a Holzheimer lecture speaker. It's quite an honor to be here. I'm presently sitting in my living room in Leesburg, Virginia. As Marcy mentioned, I used to work for the National Park Service 2.5 years ago. I finally retired from really what was an absolutely dream job. My job there was to create all of the tourist maps of the National Park Service. Well, not all of them. I had colleagues that worked on many of the others. And what was interesting about the office is that when you got an assignment, you tended to keep it for the rest of your career. Tonight, I'll be talking about mapping the Grand Canyon. It's a project that I got early on in my career, and then over several decades, I revisited mapping the Grand Canyon for various projects. So tonight, what I'm going to do is talk about making 4 National Park Service maps of Grand Canyon. All of these maps have been inspired by cartographers from the mid-19th or 20th century, manual cartographers who were very good, the best in the world at what they did. And I'll be talking about how I applied the manual techniques that they used to digital techniques. So let's jump into the talk. If you were to visit Grand Canyon several years ago, drive up to the ranger station, pay your entrance fee, this is the map that you would receive. A very typical, what we call unigrid National Park Service map. On the left-hand side, you can see the black title band, which is the sort of the trademark of National Park Service maps and brochures. And what makes this National Park Service map typical is that it shows, well, Grand Canyon National Park. The park itself spans 277 river miles from Lake Powell in the northeast to Lake Mead in the southwest, and you can see the park shape highlighted in green. It kind of looks like a dragon of sorts. The boundary follows the canyon rim in places, the river in other places. It's a very unusual park shape. And this is a perfectly fine National Park Service map, except for one thing. Grand Canyon National Park is visited by over 6 million visitors every year. Believe it or not, 90% of them visit the park for only 4 hours or less. And they go to one little spot. I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer, on the south rim right here. So what they're getting is a map of the entire national park. And yet when they go to the park, they really can't use this map because of the small scale for getting around and finding things. The rangers at Grand Canyon National Park, realized this problem and contacted me, and we discussed coming up with a better solution. And that's going to be the first map I'm going to talk about right now. It's the South Rim Pocket Guide. So this is focused on the 90% of the visitors who just go to the South Rim and spend 4 hours or less at the South Rim. Of course, people who spend longer there could also use this map. But before jumping into the map, let's just do a little photographic reconnaissance of the South Rim. When you, in your mind's eye, when you think of the Grand Canyon, views like this from Yavapai Point at sunset come to mind. The Grand Canyon is one of the world's iconic, landscapes, and people come from all over the world to look at views just like this. Just quite beautiful. And I'll, if you will, try to remember the colors that you see in this photograph. I'm going to be revisiting these colors later on in my talk. So this is what people come to the canyon to see, but there's another aspect of Grand Canyon National Park in the South Rim that they don't necessarily expect. A couple hundred yards away from Yavapai Point is the Park Visitor Center. It's on the Coconino Plateau. And you can see it's a completely different environment. It's almost pancake flat. It's fairly heavily forested. It's very developed. There's a labyrinth of roads throughout the South Rim. And as a visitor, they have to navigate in their car, where to go in this landscape where they don't have any landmarks. There's no high points at all to see. So immediately when, driving to the Grand Canyon, they're confronted with this navigation problem. And obviously a map would greatly help out with that. Other visitors come to the Grand Canyon on the Grand Canyon Railway from Williams, Arizona. Here we see some people disembarking at the train station. Believe it or not, the canyon is several hundred yards away to the right of this scene, but who would know where to go? You see a convoy of buses also in this scene. Grand Canyon National Park and the South Rim get a lot of day trippers coming in from Las Vegas. So there's multitudes of people coming here, and they need to get from depots like this to the canyon rim very quickly, and a map would be quite helpful for doing that. And adding to the navigation problems at the Grand Canyon, to relieve congestion, automobile congestion at the canyon, the Park Service has a shuttle bus system. There's 4 different routes, all color-coded, and certain parts of the South Rim, you can only go to them on the shuttle buses. So, to get around, you need to know the shuttle bus routes, the schedules, and so forth. And of course, a lot of Americans are not used to using public transportation, so that's an issue as well. And then finally, for the more energetic visitors to the South Rim, there's surprisingly a very comprehensive network of bike trails, and you could also rent bicycles to get around. And I'll have you know that the trails do not go close to the rim, in case you're wondering about that. And we don't want people flying off. So that's the South Rim in photographs. Let's look at it on a map. When I talk about the South Rim, what I'm talking about is this stretch that runs 32 miles from Hermit's Rest in the west to Desert View in the east. So this is the road accessible part of the South Rim where most visitors go. In the center of this, you see Grand Canyon Village. That's the sort of the nexus, the heart of where visitors will congregate. Let's take a closer look at that. What we're looking at here is an OpenStreetMap data dump, and as you can see, it's quite complex. There's a lot of roads, a lot of trails, many buildings. Believe it or not, there's 2,000 permanent residents that live at Grand Canyon Village, not counting the visitors that are there every day. It's a big place. There's even a high school there. So as a visitor, if you get an OpenStreetMap map or Google Maps or whatever, and you're looking at it, you're confronted with this tangle of roads and trails and buildings and stuff, most of which is not relevant to your visit. So let's strip out all of the non-relevant information and just look at the stuff that tourists need to know. It's a lot sparser, but still there's quite a bit of stuff. And it's clustered in three areas. The village on the left in the west, Market Plaza, and the visitor center. So, if I was to make a map of this, look at how closely clustered the buildings are. I don't think I really could label this. So, and then of course you've got Hermit's Rest and Desert View in the east. So, if you were to make a traditional map of the South Rim, you would need to have a map showing the entirety of the South Rim just to show where things are, and then you would have to have a whole bunch of insets. We see 6 of them here, including at the bottom insets of insets, which of course is not an optimal way of going about making a map. In the Park Service, we try not to use insets as much as possible. And I was really, wondering, how should I tackle this cartographic design problem? It's, it's a difficult one. And I was discussing this with the park, and one of the rangers said, Tom, I've got the answer for you. This ranger had just gone on vacation to Southern California, and he goes, I went to this place that had really an ideal map for the Grand Canyon, and perhaps we could copy this. And obviously he was in Disneyland. And he just thought this was just the cat's meow, a fantastic map, and it wouldn't be great to have Grand Canyon mapped like this. As you might imagine, I was less than thrilled with that prospect, and I had to sort of talk him off the ledge, so to speak. I explained that first of all, the Grand Canyon is a natural place. This is and Disneyland is a human-made, fabricated landscape. The South Rim stretches for tens of miles. Disneyland is very compact in size, and plus there's the issue of style. Just graphically, this does not really comport with the National Park Service graphic style house standard that we have. Although I have to admit, I thought this north arrow using the Mickey Mouse mouse ears was kind of clever. So anyway, we continued discussing things, and I said, let's instead go back to our roots. And I'd like to talk a little bit about Massimo Vignelli. He is the New York City, he was the New York City-based designer that came up with the National Park Service Unigrid map system, these black banded brochures. Vignelli was a very interesting fellow. He's not a cartographer per se. Again, he was a graphic designer. He did product design, he designed furniture, all sorts of different things, and as well as graphics that we see here. But one thing that he did that was very interesting is in 1972, he produced the New York City subway map. Highly diagrammatic, and obviously it's riffing off of the 1933 Beck London Underground map. And I looked at this, and I was thinking, well, look what Vignelli has done. Because he had to show all of these subway routes, and they're not equally dispersed, and there's different sizes of the New York boroughs. He had to distort size. For example, if you look at Manhattan on the left, as you know, Manhattan's a very long and narrow island north to south. He widened it to show these subway lines. And I thought, maybe it might be interesting to do something similar to this, distorting geographic reality at the South Rim. I will say, before I move on, that this map was not accepted very well, for a variety of reasons. I think it was a little bit too highly diagrammatic. Future versions of this have more recognizable geographic shapes. and the water went from a beige color that you see here to blue. And I don't think even in the the early 1970s, with all the pollution and before the Clean Water Act, that the water ever was beige colored in New York City. So anyway, this was my inspiration for the South Rim map. So what I did is I got into Adobe Illustrator and just started sketching out different views of the South Rim, distorting geographic space, trying to fit everything in. This is almost like if you were, making a map on a cocktail napkin to show a friend how to get to your house for the evening. I tried to keep relative shapes correct and positions, relative positions correct, but I greatly distorted geographic space on this. For example, in this yellow oval that you see, from side to side, that's about 3.5 miles. Now remember, from Hermit's Rest out to Desert View, that's 32 miles. So it's, essentially what I'm doing is keeping the periphery of the map almost as these little small appendages and focusing in on the village area where most of the people go. So this was, quite a radical distortion of the map. And in addition to that, these nodes within the big yellow oval, I expanded further. All of these buildings are important to visitors, and I had to have enough space to label them, so I spread them out even a bit more. Now you're probably looking at this thinking, "Wow, Tom Patterson is really doing something very radical here," and you're right. I could lose my cartographic license, so to speak, about what to do. I will explain how I explain this to map readers further on in my talk, and I think I came up with a clever way of doing that. So here's the base map that I came up with, and I think one of the first things you'll notice is that there's all of these black building footprints on the map. And I would challenge you right now to think about what does the building footprint that you're currently in, your home presumably right now, what does that look like from above? And I can tell you, I don't really know what my house looks like from when you view it from directly above. And I would say most visitors would not recognize any of these shapes on the map. So one of the first things that I did was convert these building footprints to little 3D axonometric building forms. When you're walking around any place, when you look at buildings, you look at them from ground level. You see the facades of the buildings. You don't look at the roofs necessarily. And I wanted to show the recognizable sides of the buildings. And each of these buildings, you could just measure them in millimeters across on the map. The map was 17 inches wide, so I had to fit a lot of information into that limited space. Drawing these buildings was done from photographs of the buildings taken from the ground. Any given building could take from, say, a half an hour to a full day to draw, depending on how complex it was. Fortunately, when I was working on this project, I had a couple student volunteers that helped with this drawing. And just as an example, if you look up at the upper left, there's a rather strange looking building with a chimney. That's Hermit's Rest. This is what it actually looks like. It's just, it's a fantastic building. Mary Coulter, a architect for the Fred Harvey Company, designed this. It was made to look like some Native American ruins. And, how do you distill this into a building form on a map that's only going to be a few millimeters wide? And unfortunately, one of the students working on this came up with, I think, a very nice generalization that you could see in the upper left next to it. So those are the little 3D buildings that we put on the map. Now, throughout this entire process, I was in contact with the park. There were many people involved with reviewing this, probably over 100 toward the end of the project. And I presented this as the base map that we possibly could use. And it was generally accepted very well, but a question kept on coming back at me about, where is the canyon? People didn't know where Grand Canyon was. Shouldn't I be showing it on the map? And that surprised me at first, because that beige area that you see up at the top was meant to be the canyon. I knew that, of course I did, because I made the map. But the people who were actually reviewing the map didn't know that, and that could be a problem. So I really value feedback from people when they look at a map. What's obvious to me might not be obvious to them, and that's a problem. So in this case, what I did, I got a digital elevation model, rendered the canyon terrain in 3D, and just lightly dropped it into the background. And now I think you look back there and there's this abyss of the Grand Canyon. There's no question about what is there. But I wanted it to be light and not to interfere with the South Rim buildings and roads and other things, because that really was the focus of this map. So, what next? Well, I added a black title band. Massimo Vignelli would be happy about that. One of the things you'll notice about the map is that it's very light. It's using pastel colors. They're not really gaudy at all. I also have very wide white roads on the map, and there was a reason for that. I needed to show those 4 bus routes that are color coded, and I really wanted the save the vibrant colors for the bus routes, give them focus, since visitors would need to find them to get around the South Rim. So at this point, I have the base map more or less complete, and it's a base map. It's right now it's a picture. And of course, what you need to give maps meaning are words, and I put a few on there. In fact, my initial draft of the map probably had half as many labels on it, but all of the many people at the park who were reviewing this and had different interests and so forth, said, hey, well, you need to add this, you need to add that, and so forth. And so, over time, more and more labels were, added to that, which, became a challenge. Maintaining visual hierarchies, important things needed to be bolder and bigger, and less important things needed to be more visually recessive on the map. However, you can see the major focus points for visitors: the visitor center, the market plaza, the village, for example. They are they're shown with bigger type, and also you could see the pictograph symbols showing all of the various facilities that are available there. They're all stacked up, and that gives each of these centers a certain visual mass. So at a glance, you could see where the important places are on this map. Okay, what about the distorted scale on this? How to tell people about that? Well, the first thing I did was I put some, arrows up at the top and a big label saying, map not to scale in red. Those arrows show the distance, the relative distance between various points on the map. And I thought, wow, everyone's going to see this. And guess what? No one was noticing these red arrows at all. And that was really a big problem. So the next thing I tried is I just put an oval around it with a bit of a drop shadow with a big label saying enlarged area, mapped not to scale. I sent this version out to the park. They showed it to visitors at the visitor center ranger desk. People were getting it. So I knew I was on the right track with this. And then, finally, what I did is I converted that oval to a magnifying lens, kind of a skeuomorphic design trait. And, that kind of says, okay, we just put a magnifying lens over this area, it's bigger. Also, I put the distance arrows back in at the top. One of the things that we're often taught in cartography classes is to avoid redundancy at all costs. I don't necessarily agree with that. When you have to deal with 6 million map readers, people read maps in different ways, they learn in different ways, and sometimes redundancy can be your friend getting a message across to folks. So this was working out fairly well. So I felt like that distorted geography issue had been solved. Now there was more to the map. If we slide it down, looking at the bottom, you'll see there's all this auxiliary information. Let's go through that pretty quickly. On the left, you could see some distance charts. These are for these charts show mileages between various points on the South Rim for pedestrians, for bicyclists, and for road miles. We also have a key showing all the various icons for services. Now, on National Park Service maps, we tend to not want to overdo the number of pictograph symbols that we use. On a typical park map, we might have, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of symbols on the map. This map actually has 21. It's the record for the number of different pictographs shown on a map. And some parks think the more different pictographs they have, the better their park is, the better the map is, et cetera, et cetera. They wanted all these, and they got them. Now, off to the right is the north arrow. Now, a typical National Park Service north arrow just has north labeled. It doesn't label west and east and south. But because the South Rim is essentially east-west trending, all of the bus lines are east-west trending, I thought it was very important to also label west and east on the north arrow. Many of the users of this map would be novice map readers, and they might not necessarily know the relationship between north and east and west if those labels were not labeled on the north arrow. And you'll also notice that I refrained from putting mouse ears on the north arrow. And then finally, down at the bottom is the all-important information about the bus routes, the various stops, the directions, and so forth. This was kind of an interesting design problem. I presented the park with 2 different devices for showing the bus routes. The one on the top is more graphical. It shows the bus routes going east or west. I thought that might be a little bit easier for most people to understand. And the bottom is more of a classic table. And the park preferred the table at the bottom, and so we went with that. So here's the map in the wild. It consists of 8 different folds. When folded in half, when you look at the top 4 folds, you could see that you could see all of the important information on the South Rim in one go. When it's folded up completely, it'll easily fit into a shirt pocket or into a purse. It's very compact. And you can see my wife Val, she's serving as the hand model in this case. So I created the map, and the park wanted to beta test it some more. So they over the winter, before it was published for the summer crowds, they printed a small print run of 300,000 copies and distributed them to park visitors in the winter. Then they received feedback from visitors, mostly through the ranger desk at the visitor center, and also the bus drivers when people were using the map and asking questions. They came back to me and they had a few little minor tweaks to make. And then for the summer, they printed up 3.5 million copies of the map. And I will say, when you have a map that's, with 3.5 million copies being printed, it really focuses your attention on spelling and making sure everything is correct. Boy, I would really hate to have a misspelled word on this and have to have the whole print run done over again. So this is the South Rim Pocket Guide. It's been in use for several years now, and it's proving quite popular. So we have the 90% of the people who visit the park for 4 hours or less covered with the Pocket Guide to the South Rim. How about the people who stay a little bit longer and do some stuff inside the canyon, going hiking down the rims? Completely different group of people generally. Here's a photograph of some folks hiking down the South Kaibab Trail. As you see, it's fairly steep in places. Interestingly, or I should say morbidly, about 12 people a year die in the Grand Canyon. Obviously some people do fall off of ledges, but one of the major issues they have for safety is that people see these trails, they start walking down them in the morning, and in the morning on the South Rim everything is in shade. It's relatively cool and comfortable. You start walking down the trail. It's enticing. You wonder, what's around the next bend? I'll go a little bit further and further. Oh, and you're going downhill. It's really quite easy. And finally you get down a ways. You've been hiking for a couple hours, and you thought, okay, now I need to get back up and out of here. But by that time, the sun position has shifted. It's in the afternoon. The sun is beating down on this trail at that time. It's getting very hot. Unfortunately, a lot of people go down the trail without water and in street clothes and with inappropriate shoes. So, safety is a big issue for, folks, hiking into the canyon. So I was asked to make a hiking map for the Grand Canyon. And my inspiration for doing that was a map, created by the Washburns, Bradford and Barbara Washburn. Bradford was the director of the Boston Museum of Science. His wife Barbara worked there. They were an intrepid couple. They were mountaineers. Barbara was the first woman to ever summit Denali in Alaska. Interestingly, they were on vacation, and they stopped by the South Rim and went hiking, and they were rather disturbed to find that there were no really good maps available. The best map they could find was a USGS topographic map, 1 inch to a mile, 1 to 62,500 scale, 80-foot contours, and they just felt that it was completely inadequate to experience the canyon. And what's more, the map was designed with standard USGS symbology. So the Grand Canyon map looked very much like a map of, say, Great Smoky Mountains or Acadia or any other national park. It didn't really evoke this world-class landscape. So this was in 1969, and they decided they would make a better map. And they decided to do this on their own. It was a kind of a skunk works project. They recruited, friends and family, and this project went on for 8 years. Eventually, it gained steam. Brad Washburn was, quite the salesman. He got a lot of corporate backers, and eventually National Geographic got involved, and they published the map. The result of this project was the map that you see here, the heart of the Grand Canyon, a map that I consider to be an absolute cartographic masterpiece. As I mentioned, National Geographic published it. National Geographic also co-produced it in conjunction with Swiss Topo. Swiss Topo, 2 men there spent 8 months drawing the rock hashers, those cliff mans that you see on this map. Tibor Toth, the famous shaded relief artist at National Geographic, did the shaded relief. And I think this is just one of the more outstanding examples of relief presentation on a map. And this was my inspiration for the hiking map. Now, obviously, I did not have 8 years to spend on it. I didn't have the resources that National Geographic has or Swiss Topo, but I did have some pretty cool software to help me along. This is Natural Scene Designer. It has a new technique in it called texture shading, developed by a rocket scientist, Leland Brown from Southern California. And what this does is you can load a digital elevation model. You see that in the window here. Dark areas are low on the model, higher areas are, lighter areas are higher. And what texture shading does is it detects places where there's abrupt changes in elevation and amplifies them. So I use some of those controls at the bottom, those sliders that you see, moved them around a little bit, and here's texture shading applied. And you can see what it does is it creates more contrast. It kind of shows the elevations in a more sort of step-like way. And of course, the Grand Canyon is a series of terraces, going down to the Colorado River. And if you really crank over one of those sliders, you come up with this. It detects the minutest detail in the digital elevation model. Now, you're probably looking at this thinking, wow, well, that's interesting, but it doesn't really look too good, and it certainly does not compare to the Swiss and National Geographic map that Washburn worked on. Well, let's see how this can be applied at a larger scale to topography. Here we're looking at the south rim at the bottom. You can see the Colorado River toward the top of this. It's a very typical shaded relief created from a 10-meter digital elevation model. Kind of a generic shade relief. What I'm going to do now is blend it with a little bit of texture shading. And all of a sudden, you can see the terraces in Grand Canyon much clearer than you did before. Now what I'm going to do is apply that detail that I showed you earlier. There it is, very, very noisy, way too noisy. But what you can do is from that digital elevation model is you can create a slope mask. So I'm going to apply the slope mask to this. And by the way, I'm working in Adobe Photoshop doing this. Everything is geo-referenced as well. And with the slope map, what I did is I took that texture away from flat areas and only applied it to the steepest slopes. So looking at this, what we see are textures that almost look like what the Swiss rock drawers created over 8 months, but this only took me about an hour to do with this software, so it's much more efficient. Let's toggle back to that original shader relief. It's not bad, but then with the addition of texture shading, it speaks Grand Canyon to me. So obviously it's in grayscale. The next thing I did is I colorized it. And as you might imagine, colors on a map are just very important. People judge a map simply by its colors sometimes and nothing else. In this case, what I wanted to do was come up with bright colors that would be attractive, so people would want to look at this map, but would also speak a little bit about the landscape and the environment there. I kept the lowest elevations, kind of this brownish red, suggesting that it's more arid, that it's perhaps hot if you go hike down that far into the canyon. The upper elevations are lighter. You can see a lighter green up on the plateau surfaces, suggesting that it's cool. And the Colorado River is a kind of a pretty blue. And I kind of departed from this natural colors a little bit when I did this, in that in actuality, the Colorado River is silt laden and very much the same color as the landscape around it. I wanted to show up, and so I just made it a nice blue. One thing you'll notice is that the terrain is very, very light, and that's because I had to add a lot of labels to it. Accessibility is extremely important to the National Park Service. Every label that we put on the map, we want it to be readable and clear. And so that was one reason for keeping the terrain quite light. Let's compare this hiking map to the Washburn map side by side. And you can see there is some sort of inspiration to the hiking map that comes from the Washburn map. But on the other hand, it is a completely different beast, so to speak. It's much lighter. You can see the trails more easily, and it has an overall cleaner look. The Washburn map, on the other hand, is just magnificent in the topographic detail that it shows. But you can see that it's very hard to see the labels on it. So let's look at the hiking map. This is the entirety of it. It shows the heart of the Grand Canyon from rim to rim, south rim to north rim. The trail system. It's 24 miles long from rim to rim. Some people do it in a single day, and in fact, some people do it over and back. So 48 miles. It would be the ultra runners. But most people, simply go down the trails, a mile or two, enjoy the scenery, and then walk back out. In the upper left, you'll notice a series of charts, and these are to advise people about how far into the canyon they should go. Notice the colors on the chart. At the top it's green, then it goes to yellow, and then it goes to red, kind of like what's on the map. It also mimics a traffic light. So, green is, have fun, go. Yellow is caution, be careful. And then the red is seek advice. So I think this was kind of an effective way of communicating that you really ought not to go too far into the canyon unless you're prepared and you take adequate precautions. Okay, so right now we have a map, that pocket guide of the South Rim for the day visitors. We have a hiking map available. What that means is we could redo the park brochure map now and take a completely different approach to it. So let's jump into that. If you were to have visited the Grand Canyon in 1982, this is the map that you would have received. An older style National Park Service map, and kind of typical of maps of that era. One of the things you'll notice is that the map really focuses on administrative properties. You can see the Grand Canyon Park itself. You can see the Indian reservations, the national forests, and roads. And so what this map does, it's an administrative map. It shows the human imprint on the land. It really doesn't show the landscape itself very well. It doesn't really, tell us what the natural environment is like. And this type of mapping was something that my next cartographic hero, Hal Shelton, revolted against. Shelton was a USGS cartographer back in the 1950s and 60s. And he was an interesting fellow. We often hear that cartography is a profession that combines art and science. Well, truth be told, it's more in the technical science realm than the artist realm. And Shelton kind of broke that mold in that he was actually an artist. On the left, you could see a painting of canyon country that he did. He was quite accomplished. His brother also was a geologist and would fly over the western United States, and Hal would sometimes accompany him. And Hal would be, using maps and looking out at the landscape below. And, he was bothered that the maps that he had, that he was, using to look at the landscape, did not really relate well to the landscape. And so he came up with the idea of creating natural color maps. Down in the bottom is one of the natural color maps that he painted. You can see Anatolia and Turkey and the Black Sea. What he tried to do was put colors on the map that people would see from the air when they're flying over it. An entrepreneur named Jeppesen liked that idea, came up with the Jeppesen series of natural color maps. They were aimed at the nascent aircraft, airline industry in the 1950s, with the idea you could have these maps as base maps for airline routes, And as people flew across the country or the world, they'd look out the window and see country below that they could recognize more easily. What's amazing about Shelton's work is that he was painting these essentially land cover colors on maps before the advent of satellites and land cover derived from satellite imagery. So it was quite an accomplishment. So the whole idea of using natural colors to show the natural landscape of Grand Canyon is something that I wanted to do. And I used Shelton as an inspiration for that. But before I did that, I had to come up with a kind of a very, very crude sketch of what the entire brochure might look like. Here we see the Grand Canyon between Lake Powell and Lake Mead and all the accompanying text and photos, kind of roughly blocked out where they might go. Let's build a natural color map of the Grand Canyon, and we'll just look at this section right here, the main part of the Grand Canyon where tourists go. What we'll do is we'll start off with a very high oblique view that combines shade relief and texture shading. It's grayscale right now. The first thing I did to this is, well, Grand Canyon is largely an arid environment, so I made this a kind of a beige-ish brown color. It kind of suggests what the environment is like. But as you know, there's more to the Grand Canyon than desert. As you go higher up in elevation, you encounter thick forests. In fact, the Grand Canyon contains 5 of the 7 life zones in North America. So what I did next is I added tree cover to the map. Here we can see a green tint on the Kaibab Plateau to the north and the Coconino Plateau to the south. This tree tint, it was a canopy a texture that I created in Adobe Photoshop just by applying various filters. And to govern where it goes on the map, I first looked at National Land Coverage data set. This is, percent forest canopy data, shows the distribution of trees at Grand Canyon. This was pretty good, but you can see it's very kind of very scratchy looking, discontinuous. It was kind of irregular. I wanted to apply this a little bit more smoothly. I was not making a scientific map. I was making a tourist map after all. So what I did is I got the digital elevation model and selected areas where the forest cover occurs. And what's interesting about this technique is you'll notice that the digital elevation model gets lighter as you get higher. The lighter areas allow more of that green to print on the map. And that kind of emulates what's happening at the Grand Canyon. The higher you go up, the cooler and moister it is, the more biomass as a consequence is there. And so this was a very nice mask for applying the forest texture to the high plateaus. So it's starting to get there. Now, I've usually find that when you're designing a map, there's just like one element that's like really the crux of the design. And in this case, I thought the canyon needed a little bit of color. Remember that photograph of Yavapai Point where I told you to think about the colors at sunset? Well, here they are applied to the canyon itself. And like all of a sudden, yes, I see this canyon, cutting across the plateaus of northern Arizona very clearly. Now, to come up with these colors, I tried to do this, apply them in an automated fashion. I ended up creating a mask of just the areas below the rims. And it didn't really work out well because the elevation varied, the elevation of the rim varied from place to place. So I ended up actually having to delineate this by hand. It took me 6 tedious hours to do so, but I think the results were worth the effort. So now we have a nice color in the canyon. The next thing I did is I decided I wanted to etch it a little bit further down. So I got a digital elevation model, choked it, and just applied a bit of darkening to the lowest elevations. And I think this works out, pretty nicely because it makes the canyon, it gives it more depth, But also, if you're familiar with Grand Canyon, the uppermost rock layers are, sandstone and limestone, and when you get down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, you get into Precambrian Vishnu schist, which is a very dark colored rock. So this suggests the different rock types at the bottom of the canyon, and also makes the canyon look deeper. This next thing is very subtle. I applied a little bit of highlights and cool shadows to the uppermost elevations. You'll find spruce fir and aspen forests there. I wanted to look more, well, Canadian almost with a color palette. Now, next up is something extremely important. I added the Colorado River to the map. After all, the canyon would not exist if it was not for the carving forces of the river. One thing you'll notice is that the river is not a solid blue. I applied sun glints to it. That was just done with a big brush in Photoshop, applying white to it. And what it does is it gives the river kind of a sense of flowing. It's dynamic. It's not a static element on the landscape. And then next is a technique I borrowed from classic landscape painters. You think of the Hudson School of landscape painting, or maybe Thomas Moran, and you look at those paintings and they have heavy shadows in the foreground and then background haze. And I applied a little bit of that to this view. Again, this is a high oblique view, and by having foreground shadowing and then background haze, that kind of draws your eye to the center of the scene where the map is itself. Now, I think you can guess what's coming next. That would be the labels. That will convert the map from being a pretty picture to actually being a map. And and again, for accessibility, which is just so important for the National Park Service, I applied some drop shadowing under the labels to give them a little bit of snap. Now, the map at this point is complete, or at least the part of the map that we're looking at. I'd like you to kind of notice what the map does not have. It does not have roads. It does not have surrounding property tints on it. The National Park Service boundary is just shown very faintly in yellow. What this essentially is a natural portrait of the Grand Canyon as a physical place and not a human construct. So let's take a look at this natural map of the canyon within the entire brochure. My colleague Melinda Schmidt was working on the design of this. This is actually a earlier draft of the brochure. It went through a lot of changes, but you get the idea of how the map was integrated with the other brochure elements. The map serves as the background for the entire brochure. And you'll note that there's a inset map that actually does show roads and property. So we didn't leave that out. It was there if people really needed to know it. But what it really does show is just a portrait of the canyon as a physical place. Now, National Park Service brochures usually take a couple of years to create. They go through lots of review, and thank goodness for that. Look at the inset map down at the bottom. You'll see a little animal sitting on it. You probably can't read the label, but it says ringtail. But there's a problem with that. That is not a ringtail. Someone accidentally put a lemur from Madagascar on there. And fortunately, it was caught because 1 million copies of this brochure were printed, and it would have been just a crying shame, very expensive to have to reprint the brochure. So let's get rid of the lemur, and there's the ringtail. Instead, everything's cool, and we could kind of move on. So that's the brochure. I have one more map I'm going to talk about, quickly here. This was a brochure map that I made in the year 2000. It's a panorama of the South Rim, a completely different treatment. And my inspiration for this map was Heinrich Moran. He's an Austrian panoramist. He mostly painted ski areas. but he also painted 4 panoramas of US national parks. They were Denali, Yellowstone, North Cascades, and then Yosemite that we're looking at here. And Baran was just a master of panoramas. You can see him, he's in his Tyrolean vest. He dressed very flamboyantly, and his panoramas were, very flamboyant. Take a look at the skies. Baran was a very spiritual man. He liked to sort of paint his skies in a very ethereal manner. He often devoted, a good portion of the panoramas to sky and not all that much to the landscape below. But they're obviously just masterpieces. These are things that you could just peer into. These are all incidentally scanned very high res and on the National Park Service website for download. So if you're interested in this, contact me and I can tell you how to find them. So this was my inspiration for creating a panorama of the South Rim. And this is what I came up with. By comparison to Baran's work, it's stayed. Well, I dress more stately than Baran, I have to admit too. Notice there's less area taken up by the sky. There are clouds, but they're very faint on this. I really wanted people to focus not on the sky, but actually on the map itself. Now, there's something very interesting about this map that mimics kind of the real world experience when you're flying over landscape in an airplane. When you're sitting at the window and you look out toward the horizon, you see the horizon. Landscape features are in profile. You might see a canyon or a mountain sticking up. But then as you turn your head downward, revert your eyes toward the ground, things become more, you're looking straighter down, and it's looking more like a planimetric map. And what I did is on this map is I built that same effect into it. You'll notice that in the foreground at the South Rim, things look very map-like. And then at the North Rim, it's in profile. And I employed a very interesting technique to do this. Baran did this himself manually, but I used software. Bernhard Jenny at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, came up with this really interesting software, Terrain Bender. What you could do is load a digital elevation model into Terrain Bender and then distort the curve. You can see what I did on the left. The original terrain base is straight, and I essentially, created a convex arc from the terrain. You can see it on the right, going from front to back. Let's look at that straight on. So in the foreground, it's more planimetric, more map-like, and you can see that it forces the horizon into the background. And this was how it was applied to that final Grand Canyon map. You're looking at it right now and you realize what I did. But most viewers of this kind of look at it and it looks kind of natural. The foreground, what you really need to know for getting around is map-like, and the background is very much like the view you would get from the rim looking across the canyon. So it's kind of the best of all worlds. I made this in 2000, and I did it as kind of an experimental map, and I thought, okay, they're going to use it for a year or two, and kind of move on to something else. Well, much to my surprise and delight, they used it as the main park brochure map for 15 years, and it's now still being used in the park newspaper. So this kind of skunkworks project really had a life of its own. So at this point, I'm going to wrap up and just make a few concluding comments. We've seen some of my cartographic heroes, Baran and Washburn and Vignelli, et cetera, and Shelton. Some of the things that they created in the late manual era, these were maps that only the most talented people could do, who had artistic skills. And what's been really just sort of wonderful is, with the advent of software, GIS and graphical software, geospatial data, online sharing of information and techniques that we've seen in the last 15, 10, 5 years. What's happened is that people who are not as exalted as these, these people I've been highlighting in this talk, such as myself. I'm not an artist, but with a little bit of perseverance and study, can create maps that rival what these masters did in the past. And it's just a wonderful thing. I mean, essentially nowadays, when you're making a map, if you could dream it, you could probably do it. Almost anything is possible. And I'm just absolutely convinced that there's never been a better time to be a cartographer than right now. We're now in the golden era of cartography. So with that thought, I will end my talk and open the floor to questions. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks, Tom, for this wonderful lecture. Often our lectures are about historical maps, and so this one was different from that. And it was really interesting for me to get in a little insight into your mind. So I have a couple questions, and while I'm going to be asking you some questions, folks, you can use the Q&A function in Zoom and type in your questions, and I will ask them for Tom. So Tom, my question is kind of just a curiosity. How does one become a cartographer at the National Park Service?
That's a very good question. I lucked out. I just heard about it through a friend of a friend, called up the office and said, I hear you're looking for a cartographer. And they said, not anymore. And I said, well, I do shaded relief. And the grumpy old man who was leading the office at the time said, well, come on out here and show me what you've done. I showed him the fact that I could draw manual relief. This is, back in 1990. Impressed him, and he hired me on the spot. Something that does not happen as quickly now. But, I will say that the National Park Service is now hiring 2 new cartographers. And they're using the recent graduates program to bring in recent university graduates into the National Park Service. They've already made an offer to one recent graduate, and they're about to do the same to another one. And I am just delighted because I've agreed to go back and mentor these 2 people for a full year. So I'm doing that as a volunteer, and it should just be a blast, teaching them the techniques that I have been using, sort of the National Park Service way of mapping, but also, handing the baton off to a new generation who will, take the mapping to, different, new and wonderful levels. So
you just mentioned the national park way of mapping. Was there, I'm assuming there was an evolution to come to this national park way of mapping. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, certainly. It certainly was an elevation, but an evolution, but a big jump happened in the late 1970s when Vignelli was designing the unigrid look. At the same time, the National Park Service contracted to R.R. Donnelly Cartographic Services in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to come up with a sort of a unified mapping look. Herwig Schutzler, who headed up the unit at the time, came up, helped develop the design that's become the classic National Parks Service design. That 1982 map of Grand Canyon that I showed you during my talk was, an outcome from that effort. And nowadays it has evolved considerably. People ask me about National Park Service map standards. Well, there is kind of a classic National Park Service map, but as there's 430 national parks nationwide, from Arctic Alaska to the Caribbean, urban parks, historical parks. One's design style does not fit all. And so we tweak the designs according to the needs of the park. And probably the most standard things on our maps is the font that we use. It's Frutiger, kind of a nice, safe, mappy font. We have our map symbols, which everyone recognizes. All the brochures have black bands, but and in general, we try to have a very clean, legible, readable map style. But beyond that, anything goes, as you've seen in this talk.
Yeah. So in that vein, John Olson is asking if you've ever thought about using a saguaro cactus as your north arrow.
No, but I once had a saguaro cactus tie. If you can imagine that. It was called a cacti.
Oh! Okay, that's pretty funny. Just some comments coming through. Wonderful presentation, Tom. Very insightful presentation of your creative process. Really like the magnifying glass approach to represent sparse elements across a large area. So how do these maps connect with the growing volume of natural and heritage trail maps around the country, many of which may go along river trails and historic old roads and rails to trails places, and linking with local and state hiking, canoe, equestrian paths, and connection with archaeological, geographic, and paleontological sites? So sort of making those links from the national park maps to all of these other trails and natural area maps that are happening.
Yeah, that's a very another very good question. I've worked quite a bit with the Potomac Heritage Trail in the Washington D.C. area that basically follows the watercourse of the Potomac River, and that national park unit is actually an amalgam of different state and local regional parks, and that cartographically has been handled through just a wide array of maps. You know, when you print a map, there's only so much a printed map can do, as we've seen from my talk. It needs a singular focus almost. And so, you know, for all of, for the Potomac Heritage Trail, there's an overview map showing the entire trail, on one sheet of paper. But then if you're in a specific area, these partner groups would have their own maps that would be sort of tied in to the larger entity. But yeah, it's a difficult problem, especially with the proliferation of trails. There are a number of trails that are administered by the National Park Service, and the Park Service does have a national trails map that we publish, showing in a general fashion nationwide where the trails are.
Do the maps come in different languages, particularly Spanish?
Yes, they do, and it depends on the region and if there's a large percentage of say Spanish speakers there. There's been more use of second languages on a map, English and say an indigenous language. For example, the Alaskan maps now have Native Alaskan names on many of the prominent features on those maps. So yeah, the answer is yes. They're predominantly in English, but there are now more Spanish maps. I know we've done out in Guam, there's a where the Pacific is there. We have Chamorro labels on those maps too.
That's fantastic. So 400 plus national parks, ? Please explain the difference between your number and the actual number of national parks, which is 63.
Okay. In the National Park Service, there are many different names for the lands that are administered by the Park Service. There's, of course, national parks, there's national monuments, national battlefield parks, national recreation areas, national river. There's actually, I think, 22 different names for national park units. What's interesting in the National Park Service is that we refer to all of these units as parks, regardless of their official names. So if it's the National Riverway, we just refer to it as a park. I think the public more than anyone else kind of fixates on the national park name versus a national monument or riverway or battlefield park or whatever. So we look at them all as equal parks. And the number of parks is just continually growing. I just can't keep up with it. I think it's 430, 431. It's another week, another park sometimes.
I feel your pain. It's how I feel about the collection here sometimes. It just keeps growing, so I don't really know how many maps we actually have. And so it's just the number that I say is always out of date. So somebody has a question. Have you tried to apply any weather patterns?
A little bit, yes. I mean, for some exhibit maps for Sitka, which is a cultural park in southeastern Alaska, we have shown the Aleutian low out in the Bering Sea that generates all the the high precipitation amounts that come into that park in the winter. But generally, no, we tend to focus more on the actual land cover and vegetation, which of course is a reflection of the climate of that area, but not the individual weather patterns.
Nick Pancic, you asked a question, but I'm not sure I understand it. So you said, can you do a proper map without ever editing the site? Oh, in person.
Yes. I mean, one of the delights about
without visiting the site in person.
Yeah, one of the delights about my job was I got to visit most of these parks. When there would be a new map and brochure project, a team would be formed up. It would always be a different team. It would be a cartographer, a writer, editor, and a designer, and we'd go out to the park for a few days or a couple weeks for area familiarization, to talk to the staff to see what topics they wanted to emphasize on the map and in the brochure. And I would always go out there with the draft map, and I have it on my iPhone as a geospatial PDF, and I would be editing as I went around the park and taking field notes. But to answer the question, this was Nick, that yes, it is possible, to make a map without visiting the park. That has happened during the last year to my colleagues who are now working at the Park Service. Because of the pandemic, they can't go out to the parks, so they're doing this remotely, through Zoom conversations such as we're having right now. Fortunately, with all of the geospatial data that's available out there right now, you could find almost everything that you want. Typically, when I make a Park Service map, I get in contact with the GIS specialist at the park and say, please send me a hard drive of all of your data. I will sift through it. And I look at it almost like as like an artist's palette or something. It's the raw materials that go into making the map. And I'm not going to use 95% of it, but there's going to be 5% of that stuff is going to be gems. And I kind of mix and match them and see how they could come together to tell spatial stories on a map. And it's really kind of exciting. And with satellite imagery, and I have to say, I use Google an awful lot. I'm making a map of a park, and there's a road intersection, and I don't really know if that road is paved or still gravel. I'll just go on Google Street View and just like you, and take a look and say, yes, it is gravel there. I will show it a different way on the map. So the short answer is yes, you can make a map without going to the park, but I think it's much better if the cartographer goes there, sees it in person, and really kind of gets a feel for the place. And most importantly, whenever I go to parks, I'd like to watch the visitors and also experience the park as a visitor would, and kind of tailor the map to the needs of the visitor so that they could get around, enjoy the park, and have an interesting and safe visit.
Yeah. I'm not seeing any questions coming through, but I'm going to ask another question because I can.
Please.
Have you always made maps using computers?
No, I'm, as you can tell from my gray hair, I got my start fairly early on in cartography. In fact, in 1978 was my first cartography class. It was pen and ink, Leroy lettering sets, and all of that wonderful manual stuff. And I'm being facetious when I say manual, because really using computers and digital technology has really sort of unlocked on a personal level my creativity when making maps. What used to take just days and sometimes months to do now could be just done in a matter of minutes. And what's nice about it is you could spend more time relatively thinking about design than you used to. Everything before was a slow production slog. Now the production is vastly sped up. That means you could think about, how can I make the best possible map in this allotted time that I have. And I think that's really kind of a gift.
Favorite map you've ever created?
Whichever map I'm working on right now. Which happens to be that physical map of North America, which is on my website. So check it out, folks. That's my favorite map on April 8th.
So a little bit more of a technical question. How do you transfer the GIS data into the program, I'm assuming Illustrator, that you use to create the maps? Is there an intermediate program that you use? How does that technological process work?
Yeah, another good question. Yeah, in Adobe Illustrator, we're using the Avenza Geographic or Map Publisher plugin. So essentially what this plugin does is it brings GIS capabilities, functionality to Adobe Illustrator. So you can import all manner of GIS vector data into Adobe Illustrator, manipulate it in various ways. So essentially it serves as a bridge between the geospatial and the graphical world, which is really kind of wonderful, having the best of all worlds there. And then in Adobe Photoshop, in the raster world, Avenza has another plugin called Geographic Imager, which allows you to import satellite images, digital elevation models, and mosaic them, maintain georeferencing, reproject them, et cetera, et cetera. So, so both of these, these types of data are covered in Photoshop and in Illustrator with the Avenza plugins, which are really kind of sweet.
One last question. So do battlefield maps pose different problems with trying to locate army units, say from 1863, as opposed to like where actual physical features are now, like as things have changed?
Oh yeah, you betcha. Most battlefield parks, if you go to them today, are these manicured lawns. They're just gorgeous. And as a visitor, you have this hard time, connecting, this horrible battle or whatever that happened there to the landscape they see today. And as a cartographer, we try to kind of bridge that gap a little bit, by overlaying troop movements and so forth. One of the issues with battlefield maps is the traditional military map where you show one group with a rectangular box with an X through it. It's all this very abstract symbology that's really sort of tailored to military mapping. The average visitor does not necessarily understand it. It's not necessarily very pretty to look at. And so we try to come up with other graphical devices that, someone who is not a military aficionado can look at and, hopefully instantly grasp. Now, mind you, on the other hand, there's a lot of people who are, military buffs too. So we can't, quote unquote, dumb the maps down too much so that they, they're put off by them. So it's kind of a fine line that we're treading there.
Great. I am going to end it there. Thank you so very much for joining us virtually tonight. It was a fantastic talk. Stay, don't leave once we end the webinar. We can see all the comments that folks have made. So thanks everybody for joining us this evening. Some question had come up about whether or not we've recorded it, and we have. It will take some time for processing to happen, but we will be sending a link out as soon as it is ready. So stay tuned for that. So thanks everybody, and we will see you sometime in the future, hopefully. All right.